Good evening and welcome back. Tonight, we're going to talk about one of the most famous gods in all of Egyptian mythology, Anubis. If you've never heard of him, Anubis is the jackal-headed god of mummification, tombs, and the afterlife. He was the one who guided souls after death, standing watch over funerals and weighing the heart of the dead against the feather of truth. For the ancient Egyptians, he was both a protector and a judge, a figure who made sure the journey beyond this world was fair. We'll explore where Anubis came from, how his role changed across different periods of Egyptian history, and why he remained such a powerful symbol of death and rebirth for thousands of years. From the earliest pyramid texts to the grand temples along the Nile, his presence is everywhere. As always, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Whether you're here to rest, to fall asleep, or to learn something new, I'm glad you've joined me. Now, let's begin. Evening in Egypt comes like a ceremony. The river burns with the last light, fields fall quiet, and the wind from the west arrives cold and dry, tasting of salt and stone. Beyond the cultivated strip, the sand begins, a pale sea that rolls toward a horizon of broken hills. At that edge, the living always met their dead. There were no city walls there, only low ground and gravel and wind that could scour a name off a stone in a single season, and there were jackals. They came when the sun was a coin set in copper and the first stars were waking. Lean and long-legged, they moved in pairs and little bands, curious and unafraid, as much a part of the scene as the thorn and the acacia. The first Egyptians feared them. They feared the yellow eyes that caught the last daylight and held it. They feared the way the animals trotted along the graves, circling and testing and returning by the same paths night after night. The land taught the people a hard lesson. A shallow pit could not keep a body. The desert will not keep anything that is not tied down and prayed over. At the beginning, the dead were set in the sand with a few jars, a wooden headrest, a bead or two for the journey. The earth itself dried the bodies. The hot wind drew the breath out and left a brown and leathery likeness with hair still in place and teeth still smiling. Those first mummies were accidents of nature, a rough proof that the desert was a kiln and the body could be fired like clay. Yet nature was not gentle. A jackal can open a grave with a few patient scrapes of the paw. The sand that preserves can also reveal. In the morning, a family might find that the linen had been pulled and the arm lay bare to the light. It was an outrage and a sign. The people looked to the creatures that could tear a body and imagined a power that could guard a body. There is an old way of thinking in Egypt. To master a thing, you give it a god and speak to that god by a name that the world will respect. Jackals run the edges of the fields. They know the border country where life ends and something else begins. So the people called up a guardian out of fear and out of need. They said there is one among the jackals who is not a scavenger but a judge. They said there is one who stands upon his mountain above the necropolis and sees every trespasser in the lightless hours. They gave him a place at the head of the tomb. They gave him color and emblems and titles that carried weight. They called him the foremost of the Westerners. They called him Lord of the Sacred Land. They named him with an older sound that the scribes rendered as Inpu and that we call Anubis. Before kings raised pyramids, before Osiris sat on any throne of the dead, there were little markers in the gravel and lines of stones pointing west. The west was the direction of the sinking sun, and therefore the direction of every human hope. At that boundary, the people built mastabas of mud brick and packed the floors with crushed limestone. The smell of natron lingered in the air. Priests smeared resin on wooden coffins and traced protective signs that had been taught by habit long before they were written by reed on papyrus. And in the minds of the mourners, a black jackal crouched on the lintel, in perfect stillness, eyes open, ears forward, a figure so calm it could be mistaken for a statue until it turned its head. Black was not the color of night alone. It was the color of the flood mud the river left each year, the color of the silt that makes wheat rise ankle-high and then knee-high, and then to the belly. To paint a god black was to speak of renewal. To paint a jackal black was to declare that even death had a seed of life in it. The artisans of the early dynasties laid this language into their work. They carved a sleek animal on sleds and shrines. They set him atop chests that held bandages and oils. They drew him at the head of a bier, hands resting on the coffin edge if they gave him human form, forepaws folded if they kept him the perfect canine he was in the wild. The image told a promise. Here is the one who watches. Here is the one who has patience enough to keep 1,000 nights of vigil. There was another side to this new faith. Tomb robbery was not a tale to frighten children. It was a craft as old as the first sealed jar of beer set beside a corpse. Men with dry hands and quiet feet followed the caravan of the dead and returned when the mourners were gone. They knew which cornerstones were weak and which seals could be cut and resealed. The presence of a god at the door mattered. A carved jackal above the passage was a warning to the living as much as a comfort to the dead. It said that the grave belonged to the guardians as surely as it belonged to the family. It said that anyone who intruded would have his heart measured one day, and that measure would not be kind. The titles of Anubis grew out of these needs and these fears. He who is upon his mountain spoke to the cliffs that rise behind the cemeteries of the West Bank. From those gravel shoulders one can see a whole procession snake across the plain, oxen leaning into the ropes, women wailing in rhythm, men carrying the pole-borne shrine with careful steps. A watcher on the heights could see the whole ritual from first chant to last seal. Lord of the sacred land spoke to the desert itself, the holy precinct set aside from plough and harvest. Sacred did not mean soft. It meant set apart and watched. A place where the rules are different and the air is heavy with incense and old words. In the settlements that faced the setting sun, talk of the jackal god settled into ordinary life. A woman might leave a little loaf near a boundary stone and murmur a request that the jackals patrol her grandfather's grave. A man might paint a small jackal on a pot and set it by the door so that the West would not forget his house when the time came. Children would see the lean dogs on the ridge at twilight and fall quiet without knowing why. When a body was carried out on the sled, the procession paused at the threshold and a prayer named the guardian first and last. The words are simple to imagine. Walk ahead of us. Keep the dogs of the bush from the body. Keep the hands of men from the seals. Stand by when the jar is closed. Stand by when the mouth is opened in the rites that will come. The desert accepted the god as it accepts everything that has weight and intention. The wind still moved sand through the door cracks, but in the language of the people the jackal god stood there and faced it. Foxfire and stars still blinked over the hills, but in the imagination of the mourners they were the eyes of the patrol. To live in Egypt was to live with the river in front and the west behind, with the promise of the flood and the certainty of the grave. A culture that knows those two facts will build its gods accordingly. Anubis was built of watchfulness and of craft. He belonged to the line where fields end and stone begins, the line where a voice is soft out of respect and a step is careful out of fear. Archaeology puts shape to what the storytellers kept alive. In the first royal tombs, a jackal sign appears above a standard, clean and spare, a little beast drawn with economy and certainty. In later chapels, a full figure crouches atop a shrine chest with a linen sash at the neck and a ribbon trailing like a badge of office. The priests kept a pallet near at hand with black and gold laid out. Black for the body of the god, gold for the eyes and collar, and for the edge of the cushion where he rests. The combination is stark, and it was meant to be. In candlelight, the eyes catch and seem to move. Many a watcher in those corridors felt that movement and looked away out of courtesy. In Egypt, one does not stare at a guardian too long. So the jackal ceased to be only a thief of graves. In the mouths of the people, he became a shepherd of them. The boundary creature was made a boundary lord. What had been fear was turned into prayer. What had been dread was turned into ritual. Out of the sound of paws on gravel rose a god who could stand against the night and keep the dead in their places. Out of the desert's hunger rose the first idea that a body could be protected by more than brick and seal. It could be protected by the promise that someone watched. Myths in Egypt do not arrive like strangers. They come upriver in familiar boats and step ashore wearing known faces. So it was with the birth of the Jackal Lord. The story opens on a night of quiet water, when the reeds of the delta made their whispering music and a fog lay low over the marsh. The great tragedy had already begun. Osiris, the green-skinned king who taught men to farm and to measure and to speak laws, was gone from his throne. Set his brother had laid plans within plans, and the land had tasted betrayal. Isis, the faithful wife, walked the banks by starlight with her veil drawn tight and her sandals soaked, searching for what the river had taken. There are many versions because Egypt loved to tell its truths more than once. In the one that has the color of grief and secrecy, Nephthys, the sister of Isis, had been unfaithful to Set and had lain with Osiris. The child that came of that meeting could not live openly in a house where Set kept count of everything he owned and of everyone who looked at him the wrong way. Nephthys wrapped the infant in linen and left him in the reeds among the nests of water birds and the soft stink of the mud, and went away in fear. The marsh keeps many secrets, but a crying child is not a secret for long. Isis heard and followed that sound into the maze. Some say a jackal led her by keeping to the path and glancing back. Some say the wind itself pushed the reeds aside like a hand parting curtains. She found the child in a cradle of rushes, found him hungry and cold and angry at the world. Isis was a mother even when she had no child beside her. She lifted the infant and pressed his head to her breast, and sang to him in the tongue that moves mountains. She knew him for a son of her husband at once. The face tells a tale no whisper can hide. The eyes held a seriousness far beyond his days. There was a scent about him of resin and smoke and cold stone. Isis wrapped him better and carried him to a shelter of palms. She called no servants. She trusted the night, and she trusted the animals that keep company with the night. The jackals watched from a little distance and did not come nearer than she wished. She shared a crust with them and spoke the promise that would bind them for all time. "Guard this child," she said, "and I will remember your kind forever." They sat like sentries and listened. Morning carried the color of copper. Isis washed the boy in river water and traced signs over his brow. She knew Set would search when word reached him that a child had been heard crying where no child should be. She knew that if he found the boy, he would cast him into the deep marsh where only crocodiles go. So she moved by day as a beggar and by night as a queen, carrying the infant in the crook of her arm, hiding him in the reed huts of kind women, feeding him goat milk and river fish. It is said she gave him a secret name so that misfortune would not know how to call him. It is also said that in those first days when she sang, he did not cry, and when she was silent, he made a soft sound like the whine of a jackal, which made the animals lift their heads and listen. In time, she brought him to the house of Nephthys. No story in Egypt forgets balance. Nephthys had erred, but blood remembers blood, and she had not left the child out of cruelty, but out of fear. When Isis placed the boy in her sister's arms, The two women looked at one another, and a long history passed between them without a word. Nephthys swore to keep the secret. She swore by the black earth and the flood, and by the throne of their father, that the child would never be given to Set. Then Isis kissed the baby on the brow and claimed him. She would raise this boy as her own and teach him the arts that a god of the border country must know. They called him Inpu in the old speech, and Anpu in the common tongue, and Anubis when Greek ears tried to catch the sound. He grew as a boy grows in stories, strong and quick and watchful. He learned to move softly and to read the ground. He could tell the difference between the track of a fox and the track of a dog with one glance. He could smell approaching rain in the weight of the evening air. He followed Isis to the chapels and learned the words that make doors open and tools obey. He learned the virtues of silence and patience. When he sat still, he could vanish into a shadow even in a painted room. When he walked a little ahead and a little to the left, as a good guardian does. The myths hold other parentages, because the gods of Egypt wear many genealogies like many crowns. Some priests said he was the son of Ra, the old sun taking jackal form to patrol the necropolis by night. Some said Set himself fathered him on Nephthys, and that the jackal boy turned forever against the house of his sire and chose the side of law and proper rights. Others kept to the first tale and said Osiris fathered him and Isis claimed him, and that is why the jackal stands with the hawk and the throne in every court that matters. Egypt did not argue to the death over such points. All the stories served a single truth. The child belonged to the family that would bind death and make it serve order. There are little signs that the old houses kept. In the workrooms where embalmers boiled resin and mixed natron, a small figure of a jackal sat by the jars. It is said that when the boy Anubis came near such places, the air cooled, and the flies fell to the floor as if soothed by a charm. When he touched linen, his fingers left a scent of cedar and myrrh, and the cloth lay flatter, like water that has found its level. The craft of preservation knew him even before he gave it its law. Old men of the necropolis told one another that the boy once sat by a poor man's body all night while the family could not afford a priest. In the morning, the skin had tightened and the face had taken on a peace the living had not seen in years. They said the boy looked up when the first sun came and his eyes were the color of polished obsidian. And always there were the dogs. The city dogs of Egypt are not pets. They belong to no one and to everyone. They sleep in yards and follow carts and settle where work is being done. They guarded the child as if they had been summoned by a king. When he went to the market with Isis, 2 trotted ahead to clear the way and 2 took the rear to watch the corners. When he slept, a bitch lay at the door, and a scarred old dog with a broken ear lay at the foot of his bed. If a stranger came, the dogs drew near without growling, as if they were only reminding the world who held the night watch. People began to notice and to whisper. They said the orphan of the marshes had a pact with the 4-legged guardians, and that the pact would endure as long as people buried their dead and feared the dark. We do not have a birth record, only temple stories and painted scenes and a habit in the language that survived every dynasty. Yet the earliest inscriptions that give weight to the jackal god begin to appear not long after kings first gathered Egypt under one crown. The first dynasty carvers scratched a jackal on a standard above lists of offerings. The second dynasty priests called on the foremost of the Westerners when they sealed royal tombs. The figure took on a name, and the name took on prayers, and those prayers reached across centuries. In this way, a child of the marsh and of a broken household entered the pantheon with authority. He did not come through triumph or conquest. He came as a foundling who learned to keep watch. Isis made the boy part of her household properly as any mother would. She taught him law and the finer points of spells and the patience of exact work. She taught him to measure twice and cut once, and to lay the knife flat when it is not in use. She gave him a place at the side of Osiris even before Osiris returned to any throne. When she whispered that return into being, when she hunted for the scattered bones and the broken story, this boy would stand at the threshold and keep the door against every noise and every curious hand. That moment still lay ahead, but the shape of it can be seen here in the second part of the first chapter. The god who is born in secrecy and raised in the care of Isis will one day know exactly how to handle the first corpse of a god and how to make of it a mystery that men can practice. And so the origin of Anubis sits within the larger grief of Egypt like a lamp set within a dark room. His story begins with loss and with a woman walking a riverbank at night. It begins with a child left in reeds and a pact with jackals. It begins with many names for the same truth and with the understanding that border keepers are made on borders. The people who feared the animals of the cemetery made one of those animals divine, and the gods themselves agreed. The boy became the guardian of thresholds because he was born on one. The boy became the lord of the sacred land because he was found in a place where the living and the dead drink from the same water in different ways. The west bank of the Nile is a country of silence. The river glides past with its green burden of reeds and fields, but across the water the land lifts into terraces of gravel and pale cliff, a face of the world that does not smile. There the sun goes to its rest each evening, and there the Egyptians set the dead, for all things that belong to the setting belong to the west. When the earliest kings laid their bodies in brick chambers and sealed them with mud and lime, the name that was spoken over the door was not yet the name of Osiris. It was the name of the Jackal Lord. It was the one who watches. It was Anubis. Before a throne was raised for any lord of the netherworld, before the green-skinned king came to rule the millions who dwell beyond the horizon, there was a guardian who kept order among the tombs. The oldest prayers carry his titles like iron keys, foremost of the Westerners. Lord of the sacred land. He who is upon his mountain. The words have the taste of dust and salt. They were born out of years spent learning how to keep a body whole in a country that rots what is careless. When the first royal names were cut into ivory tags and stone seals, a jackal stood on the standard above them. When the first long corridors were lined and painted, a black hound lay alert on a shrine chest, ears forward, keeping his master's sleep. The West Bank at Memphis had its broad shelf of mastabas. Saqqara spread like a city of steps, and in time its tombs rose and fell as dynasties rose and fell. Giza reared its bright stone and drew the eyes of every foreigner who ever walked the floodplain. But those pyramids were only doors. The ritual that gave those doors meaning was older. It belonged to Anubis. Priests moved through cool rooms with oil lamps in their hands and a measured pace in their feet. They spoke the names of linen and natron and resin in sonorous lines that had to be said just so. The craft was not guesswork. It was not an experiment performed in hope. It was an inheritance. It was what the god of the jackal taught by his patience and by his example at a beginning that only the gods remember. Imagine the court of a dead king in the ancient kingdom, when stone first learned to speak with its own gravity. The living stepped down into chambers that smelled of cedar and myrrh and the sharp, dry breath of natron. In the inner room, a figure of Anubis crouched upon a chest that held tools for the mouth-opening ritual and knives for careful cuts and rolls of bandage, as white as new milk. The high priest wore a linen that shone like water. At the edge of the right stood men who bore the title servant of Anubis. The name had dignity. It said that the one who bore it had learned to move the dead without insult and to touch the still body with the gentleness owed to a sleeping king. If the priest wore a spotted skin over his shoulder, it reminded the living of a story the embalmers loved, the one where the jackal god drenched the leopard with punishment and took the pelt as a sign that the wild would not master the tomb. The people of the valley believed that Anubis had ruled the dead from the first, not as a tyrant seated on a chair of judgment, but as a master of the gate and an officer of order. In those early centuries, the king became a star and sailed with the sun and hunted with the gods, and the one who led him to his station was the jackal. The old texts carved in the tight corridors of pyramids speak with a soldier's clarity. "Rise," they say, "and go with Anubis. He will take your arm. He will clear the path. He will place your foot so that it does not slide in the darkness." There is no poetry more practical than that. A journey was intended, and a guide was required. The guide was the same in every generation. The guide was known by his color and his quiet and the firmness of his hand. The jackal lord justified his titles by habit. He kept to the heights above the cemeteries and looked down like a shepherd counting a flock. From the ridge he could see a funeral winding across the flats. He could see the oxen pulling the sled and the men steering it so the runners did not catch on stone. He could hear the women calling out the good names of the departed and the men answering with promises of remembrance. He followed the procession's dust with eyes that missed nothing. Where the door beams went up, where plaster set, where seals dried, he set his presence like a seal of his own. In the night when only a little wind moved the acacia leaves, the hush belonged to him. All the practical measures of burial served his law. A body must be washed and dried. The jars must be made clean. The heart must be protected because it will be needed later. The limbs must lie well because the soul will try them on again as a man tries on garments. Every instruction of the craft had a moral behind it. To do the work meticulously was to honor the god who showed the way. To do the work sloppily was to insult him and to risk trouble in the West. People believed that Anubis did not forget an insult. He did not thunder. He did not hurl fire. He has other powers. He can withhold his guidance in a place where no one walks without a guide. One must not think that the jackal lord's rule ended at the edge of royal stone. He belonged to the poor as much as to kings. A farmer from the Fayum carried his father into a low grave lined with reed mats. He still spoke the name of Anubis and set a small amulet of a jackal on the chest. He still poured a little beer on the sand for the guardian's patrol. When a caravan man died far from home, his companions called on the same god to keep the night from breaking his rest until he could be brought to proper ground. A god who rules a work as common as death becomes the god of every household in time. It is true that the balance of the underworld changed as centuries turned. The myth of the slain king and of the grieving wife and of the son who avenged became the master story of Egyptian hope. Osiris rose and took his throne among the Westerners and ruled as a king rules, with a court and a judgment hall and a field of reeds beyond for the justified to harvest without sweat. But the rise of a king did not make the captain of the gate less necessary. It did not replace the need for a keeper of secrets. Anubis did not lose honor when Osiris gained it. He gained definition. He became the sworn officer of the throne he had helped to restore. He carried the authority of the first lord with the humility of the servant who knows the work better than anyone. In the ancient kingdom, the living learned to speak to the dead through pipes sunk from chapel floors into burial chambers, and through letters written on bowls and linens. What they said often begins the same way. Anubis, look to this place. Be on your mountain. Keep the prowler from the door. Keep the heat from the jars. Keep the mischief maker from the seals. The formula never grew tired because fear never grows tired. The West makes a promise, and men need to hear it again each season. A god announces himself in many ways, sometimes with thunder, sometimes with a feather laid just so. Anubis preferred the quiet method. He did not demand mountains of granite or rivers of wine. He took his place by the door and watched, and in that long patience his names gathered around him like votive lights. First came the titles that trace a map. Foremost of the Westerners, the words taste of dust and sunset, and the long ridge that runs behind every cemetery. The title names him as the first among those who dwell beyond the river where the sun goes to rest. Lord of the sacred land. This is the desert set apart from plough and market, the sand salted with ashes and prayers, the holy ground where the dead are addressed by name and told to sleep. He who is upon his mountain. Imagine the limestone cliffs above the necropolis, pale and scarred, and upon that height, a black figure keeping the measure of all that moves below. These names are not poetry only. They are function. They tell the living where the guardian stands and what he is sworn to keep. Later came the titles that speak to craft. He who is in the place of embalming. The phrase belongs to the workroom where resin steams in copper bowls and natron lies in white drifts like winter snow no Nile has ever known. The place of embalming is a room of knives and linen and careful hands. It is a school as much as a shrine. Anubis owns that room. He is the master who teaches the order of each act, the one who knows when the blade should cut and when it should rest upon the stone. Master of secrets, counter of hearts. Both titles are earned at the threshold of the next world where the balance sits and the feather of truth waits. Secrets are not gossip in Egypt. They are the hidden names and the rites that must be remembered exactly, or else the path will bend away into dark places. To count hearts is not to tally a crowd. It is to weigh the core of a person against the rule that keeps the cosmos from breaking. The old language holds his birth name like a bone bead threaded through many ages. Inpu or Anpu when the priest sings. Anubis when a Greek clerk copies the roll. A name is shaped by the lips that speak it, but the god it reaches remains the same. In writing, the scribes set a jackal upon a standard and placed the signs of a shrine beneath. On funerary chests, the animal reclines with its paws outstretched and its tail folded close. The eyes are long and steady. The ears stand like paired blades. The woodworkers painted him black and gilded the collar and the rim of the cushion. The choice of color is a language in itself. Black is the rich mud the river gives after the flood. Black is the skin of a body properly preserved. Black is night at its most protective. Anubis wears that color as a promise. Decay will be managed. Death will be put to order. From darkness will come renewal. When the god rises to his hind legs and takes a man's body, he does not lose anything of the animal that made him. He stands straight with the calm of a hunter who has chosen his ground. A ribbon marks his throat. In one hand he holds a was scepter that tells of office and of the authority to keep chaos out. In the other he may hold the ankh that promises life beyond what can be measured. Artists sometimes place him beside the bier, one hand upon the coffin as if to steady it while the family finds its breath. In temple reliefs, priests wear a jackal mask when the dead must be addressed directly. The mask is not theatre. It is an argument that gods and men can meet if work is done in the proper order and if respect is observed at every step. There is an older emblem that the learned point to with a shiver. It is the immute fetish, a skinned animal form bound and tied to a pole that rests in a tall jar. It stands near the embalming bed in scenes so ancient they feel like dreams remembered rather than stories told. The meaning belongs to the great silence of the first time, but the object is always near Anubis. It is a signal that life has been opened and must now be remade. It is a sign that the boundary has been crossed and a guardian is present to see the crossing done correctly. The fetish stands where the work is most serious, and where the room must be kept pure by deeds and by words. His family, as priests speak of such things, carries the same logic. Anput is named as his consort in certain towns where the cult ran deep. She is a feminine mirror of the jackal guardian, a presence at the side of funerary rites, and a reminder that care has more than one face. Their daughter Kebeshet appears as a serpent bearing water in graceful loops, the cool refreshment poured for the dead when the long dryness of waiting must be eased. In sermons, the embalmers say that Kebeshet cleanses like a running stream, and that every libation poured in a chapel is her gift. In this way, the family of Anubis turns a craft into a household. Father preserves, mother watches, daughter purifies. The dead are not handled like wood or stone. They are kept as one keeps kin. Epithets bloom around a god as flowers do around a well. Some are stern. The dog who swallows millions warns the wicked in a voice that leaves no argument. Some are gentle. The good being suggests a guardian who forgives the honest mistake and guides a shaking hand. The petitions carved on stelae use these names with care. They ask the foremost to look north and south and keep watch. They ask the lord of the sacred land to plant his feet at the tomb doorway and admit only those who come with offerings and with respect. They ask the master of secrets to remember the poor who could afford only a few strips of linen and a little jar of oil. The titles carry the prayers to the ear of the one who has promised to listen. There are forms beyond statues. There is the low wooden sledge that carries the mummy. At the prow, a small Anubis figurine often rides as if towing the dead into their house. There is the funerary chest, painted with a jackal upon a roof, the sign that the contents are under his protection. There is the scale that stands in painted halls, one pan for a heart and one for a feather that never frays. In these images, Anubis is never in a hurry. He adjusts the beam with 2 careful fingers. He calls no attention to himself. He looks at the needle and waits for it to find its center. He is precise, and his precision makes him beautiful. The black skin of the god invites meanings that reach beyond the room of embalmers. Black is the color of the field after the flood, when the earth is soft and the seed wakes. Black is also the stain that natron leaves when it has finished its drying and the work has gone well. In the museums where the dead of Egypt sleep inside their glass, faces dark and serene, there is a strange peace that settles on the visitor. It is not horror. It is not cold. It is the order of things made visible. The artisans found a way to show that order in the figure of a jackal who does not blink. The paint outlasts kingdoms. The meaning outlasts the paint. If a man from another land were to ask why a jackal should be a god, the answer would arrive like water poured from a deep jar. Because jackals knew the graveyards before men did. Because they walked the line between village and waste with understanding. Because fear can be made into guardianship if you put the right names on it, and hold those names with discipline. The Egyptians did not wait for a storm god to explain death. They looked to the animal that most troubled them and commanded it to serve. Then they kept the pact with offerings and with good work. In the doorway scenes, in the sleep of kings, in the hearts that sought lightness before the feather, Anubis kept his side of that bargain. So the god stands in our imagination as he stands in 1,000 chapels, ears forward, eyes alive, fur black as river soil after the waters go down, ribbons lying flat against the throat, scepter in hand, one palm touching the lid of the coffin as a sign that the next breath, though it belongs to another world, will be taken in safety. There is no shouting. There is no spectacle. There is a door and there is a watcher, and beyond that door a land that is not empty but ruled and measured, where a person may hope to arrive with dignity because a jackal kept the path. There are crimes that tear a people the way a stone tears a sail. The story of Osiris begins like a festival and ends in a silence that lasts for ages. In the bright years of that old reign, the fields rose clean. The river kept its promise. and Egypt felt itself a single house under a wise master. Osiris ruled with the steadiness of a farmer who knows every furrow by feel. He taught men to plow in straight lines, and to share water fairly, and to sit together when disputes flared. Beside him sat Isis with her patient mind and her hands that knew every herb and every hidden word. The court hummed with order. Then Set watched and counted and waited. Set was the brother who stood a little apart at ceremonies, the one with the desert in his bones. He saw things as a tally and a measure of power. The love that bound Osiris and his people only sharpened the thorn in Set's heart. So he moved among flatterers and soldiers and men who liked the feel of a secret. He whispered that the crown should sit differently. He measured the king and found him mortal. From those thoughts grew a plan as exact as a carpenter's drawing. There came a feast. The wine was sweet and the songs old and fine. Set's house shone with lamps, and the guests wore collars that flashed like fish in the Nile. In the center of the hall stood a chest so perfect it stilled conversation. Cedars had given their straightest grain for its sides. Lapis and carnelian winked at the edges like small stars. Set lifted a hand and said that a gift should go to the one whom this chest fitted as if a god had traced the measure. One by one, the guests lay down inside to laughter and friendly jeers, each finding the box a little too tight or a little too long. When Osiris stepped forward, there was a hush that tasted of metal. He lay down and the air changed. The chest took him as if it had waited only for this moment. Lids fall in stories at the speed of fate. Set's men heaved the cover into place. Nails bit, lead poured, seals pressed. A king's breath went out under scented cedar. The cries of those who understood arrived too late to be useful. In a confusion of torches, the chest was borne out and set upon a barge. The river took it with the calm of a judge. Darkness spread over the hall like spilt ink. Set was careful to waste no words. He let the current carry the deed away while he gathered faces that would say later they had seen nothing. The Nile knows its work. It bore the coffin north through wide water and narrow. It slid past villages that were busy with their own griefs and joys. It came at last to the sea and was taken by a heaving world of salt and wind. No one knows all the miles it walked upon the waves. Some say the chest found a harbor among the roots of a tamarisk at Byblos, that old city of traders and perfumes, and that the tree grew around it as a mother around a child. The trunk thickened. The chest vanished in living wood. The story crossed tongues, and the men of that coast cut the tree for a pillar so straight it could hold up a palace roof. While iron and wood made their own history, Isis walked the delta with her veil closed and her sandals muddy and her voice quiet with asking. The rivermen knew her without her naming and told her what they had seen. She followed the hint of a current and the rumor of a cedar smell. She traveled as a beggar by day and as a queen by night. Markets gave her bread and the kind of news that sits just under the tongue. Women took her into their courtyards and pressed her hands and did not ask the question that was a stone in every breast. At last her path bent toward Byblos. The palace there smelled of cedar and purple dye and rank pride. Isis came with a trick of humility that great souls can wear when needed. She waited by the well until the queen came with handmaidens. In time she entered the court, and the pillar told her what it held. There are gentle thefts in old tales. Isis asked for the pillar with a gift of healing in return. The king, who owed her more than he knew, let the great beam be cut free. When it lay full length in the courtyard and the workers drew back, Isis set her hands upon it and closed her eyes and prayed in the language that moves the world a finger at a time. The wood opened as a fruit opens, and there lay the chest. No words passed between Isis and the king then. She carried her sorrow out without witnesses and set the coffin upon a boat for Egypt. There is a room the color of quiet, where the air tastes of salt and cedar. The embalmers call it the pure place. Its floor is rubbed smooth by careful feet, and its walls remember every whisper that was ever spoken there. On a low stone table lies the broken king. Lamps burn with the steady flame that good oil gives. Natron waits in white drifts. Linen glows like moonlight stacked in folded hills. The women who gathered the pieces have set their hands in their laps. There is a stillness like the moment before a flood arrives. Then the order that guides the world speaks through a voice older than the two lands. Let the guardian come. Let the jackal who knows the boundary do what must be done. Anubis enters without noise. He is not a storm. He is a craftsman who knows a tool by its weight before he lifts it. The priests sense the change in the room the way a hunter senses wind becoming clean. Isis bows her head as a mother would when a trusted healer steps to a cradle. Nephthys moves aside with the tired grace of one who has held vigil and now yields the bed to the surgeon. The jackal lord stands beside the table and looks upon the work that grief and duty have begun. There is no fear in him. There is a kind of stern mercy. He sets his palm upon the cold breastbone, and the lamps seem to steady more than before. Everything that follows is both invention and memory. It is the first time, and yet it feels like a procedure that has been waiting since the world was set in place. Anubis calls for water and natron. He calls for salts from the Wadi Natron, and for palm wine to cleanse, and for resin from long caravans that have crossed deserts and brought back the scent of foreign hills. The body is washed with care until river and travel, and death are rinsed away. With a blade that has tasted no common work, he makes the precise cuts that the craft will remember forever. What is corruptible is removed, and the cavity is packed with linen and herbs that thieves would one day steal from tombs because the perfume clings to them like a promise. The heart is left in the chest because that is the seat of memory and truth, and must answer questions that even a god will ask. Thoth stands near with a scroll and a pen. He does not interfere. He records. When a formula must be spoken, he provides the line like a prompter behind a curtain. Words have weight in Egypt. A sentence set in the wrong place can tilt a scale. So the ibis-headed scribe murmurs the names of the 42 assistants of judgment and the secret epithets of the guardians of gates. Horus, the avenger of his father, comes and lays his hand upon the brow and the bandages, and lends the strength of the living air to the work of return. The room fills with that company which gathers whenever a world is being made or remade. But the hands that actually touch the body are the hands of Anubis. Time in the pure place is not like time in the market. It moves in circles and in layers. The drying begins beneath a canopy while priests sing verses that are older than their grandfathers. The body rests in a bed of natron while the air licks it clean day by day. 70 days become a number spoken by tradition because a god lay once in natron while the heavens and the earth agreed upon what would be next. When the salts have done their work and the form has become light and tight as a harp string, Anubis returns with his measuring cord and his adze and his patience. The bandaging is a liturgy. Linen is not wrapped. Linen is laid like truth upon truth. Long strips pass under the body and over the body and round the limbs in a rhythm like a river that runs steady into the sea. Anubis places amulets where sense and sympathy direct him. The Died pillar for stability at the spine that must remember how to stand. The scarab near the heart that must speak for itself. The eye of protection where sight must return. The knot of the goddess where a mother's help is needed. With each placement, Thoth gives the word, and the guardian answers with a motion that fixes the word in the world. Resin seals the layers and makes the body whole in a way that is not of flesh alone. At last comes a rite that turns silence into breath. The opening of the mouth is simple to describe and impossible to do without the gods. Anubis takes the ceremonial adze and touches the lips and the eyes and the ears. He traces the sign of return over the face that once ruled and will now judge. He speaks to the organs that lie in their jars with falcon and baboon and jackal and man upon the lids, to liver and lungs and stomach and intestines, telling them that their guardians must keep them safe until the day they are needed again. He asks Osiris to open his eyes and see the field of reeds already spreading green in his mind. The air in the room changes. Those who have stood for many hours feel rested. The lamps feel brighter without having been trimmed. When the work is done, the god does what any good worker does. He steps back and examines. He checks the sling that will lift the mummy. He checks the seals of the jars. He checks the cords of the shrine chest and the softness of the cushion where the jackal statue will rest. He looks to Isis, who has watched without breaking. He looks to Nephthys, whose strength has been the quiet strength of scaffolding. There is a long breath that passes between them. It has the taste of relief and of the first sunrise after a long flood. What happened next became the cornerstone of 1,000 years of burial. Osiris woke, not to tread the dust of the palace again, not to climb the terrace steps and smell the river water cooling the bricks. He woke into the place his people called the West, a land that is both mirror and promise. He sat upon a seat that had been waiting for him since the first story. There he would judge and receive and give rest. To sit there, he needed a body that had been made whole by expert care. He needed the service of the one who had taken a broken god and made him ready for eternity. Anubis took no throne from that rising. He did not need it. He had already claimed his office by his hands. From that day, the order of funerals changed in Egypt as the river changes beds and then runs as if it had always done so. The Sem priest put on the leopard skin that remembers a story of a hunt and a punishment and the taming of wildness in the service of the dead. The lector priest stood near with papyrus and intoned the spells that keep a soul from forgetting its name. In the pure place, a man in a jackal mask bent over the table and became in truth the presence of Anubis for that hour. The Waybit became a theatre of memory and lore. Doors opened to the names. Knives cut and then were set down in the right place. Linen crossed linen with a grace that even the poor could manage when love steadied their hands. Canopic chests showed the 4 sons of Horus with faces men learned to love because they promised attention and care. The jars received what the craft said they must receive, and each was entrusted to a guardian whose virtues matched the organ within. The heart remained the center, unjarred, for it had a date with a scale and a feather in a hall that only truth can enter. Families learned the order by watching and by doing. They bought what they could. Those with means lined rooms with scenes of Anubis balancing the scales or standing upon a shrine in absolute composure. Those with little still found a way to place a small jackal at the head of a mat and to say the words that matter most: watch, guard, guide. It is a mark of greatness to know when to step back. When Osiris took up the diadem of the West, Anubis did not contest it. The one who can invent a craft can also serve under another banner, if that service brings order. The titles of the Jackal Lord shifted, without losing a syllable of honor. He became the Lord of the place of embalming, as if the phrase had always been carved beside his name. He remained foremost of the Westerners, as a captain remains foremost even when a king sits in the great chair. He walked the halls as marshal and chamberlain, eyes on seals and scales and doors, while Osiris heard the cases of the dead and gave the word that makes a soul justified. Isis looked upon Anubis with a love that is not romantic but is deeper than that. Some say she adopted him in that hour and called him son before the whole court of the West. Some say Osiris himself gave to Anubis the keeping of certain sacred organs, as a sign that trust had become a covenant. The myths do not agree on the language because language is a robe that can be changed according to ceremony. They agree on the bond. From that day, the house of Osiris and the house of the jackal were one in purpose. Kings could be jealous. Gods were large enough to share. The craft ripened into custom. 70 days became a count the whole land knew. Funerary sleds moved through streets with a small Anubis figure set at the prow, as if the god himself drew the dead to their doorway. The priest with the jackal mask supported the mummy when it was raised upright for the last rites. The adze kissed lips and eyes. Women sang a lament that remembered the search by the river and promised that no one would be left uncollected ever again. The scent of resin and pine and myrrh became the smell of love doing its work under a hard sky. Children grew up thinking that death was a craft like boat building, and that every craft had a master who had once saved a god. In painted halls, the story was told without a single wasted line. Anubis bends over the body with hands that hold a bandage as if it were a scroll of law. Anubis checks a weight upon a scale, while Thoth writes, and a monster waits without impatience. Anubis leads the justified by the hand to a throne where green-skinned Osiris sits with crook and flail and the calm of authority. The scenes are a chain with no weak link. They are meant to be read by the eye and by the soul. They are meant to remind every visitor that the order set in the pure place has been kept through time. The lesson is simple, and it rescues the heart. Death is not a chaos if you let the right hands do their work. A people that can imagine such hands does not break when the river fails for a season, or when kings come and go. The Jackal Lord taught that lesson with linen and salt and the steady laying on of palm to brow. He did not roar. He did not argue. He made a broken body into a sign that the world is held together by craft and by oath. There are nights in Egypt that smell of resin and fear. The pure place was quiet. Lamps burned with the clear flame that tells a priest his oils were good and his wicks trimmed true. Osiris lay wrapped to the shoulders. The last bandages ready. The amulets set where they would sing their silent songs. The air held that hush which comes when a great work is almost done. Then the doorcloth stirred, though no wind moved, and something colder than desert midnight stepped across the threshold. Set had heard what love and craft had dared. He came masked in cunning, wearing forms like borrowed cloaks. Some say he came with the face of Anubis himself, a jackal-headed shadow that fooled the eye and the heart for a breath too long. Some say he walked as a priest with clean hands and a voice that knew the right intonations. Either way, the trick stole only a moment. He crossed the room with a thief's certainty, seized the half-finished god, and pulled him toward the dark like a fisherman drawing a net. But there is a law in Egypt older than kings. No one steals a body from the care of Anubis and keeps it. The Jackal Lord felt the harm as a hunter feels a snag in his line. He was moving before any lamp flickered. The first the intruder knew of pursuit was the sound of feet that made no sound at all. Set dropped his disguise as a snake drops its skin. He bolted into the waste beyond the workshop, where ruined tomb walls cast black teeth upon the sand, and the moon bled itself thin against limestone. There he chose the shape of a leopard, for speed is a prayer in such moments, and claws give answers where talk is useless. The chase ran along the spine of the necropolis, through wadis white as bone, past cairns that remembered names only the desert now could pronounce. The leopard flowed over rubble and broken stele like poured shadow. Behind it came a darker shape that did not tire. Anubis did not roar. He closed the distance with the patience that has no mercy in it. Twice the leopard turned to rake at the air. Twice the Jackal Lord slid aside, reading the arc of the blow as surely as he reads the arc of a star across a winter sky. They came to a high shelf where the cliff drops like a curtain. The leopard wheeled, lips peeled back, breath like hot copper. Anubis lifted a brand from a funerary fire that still smoldered among potsherds and ash. a single coal set on a length of iron for sealing jars. He took 3 steps in and struck once across the spotted hide. The cry that tore the dark felt older than language. The brand burned a rosette into fur and skin, a pattern of pain that bloomed into circles and rings. The leopard sprang again. Again the iron sang. Where the stroke fell, spots rose like stars born from sudden heat. Set saw the mark that would never wash away. Rage turned over into fear the way a boat rolls when a great fish takes the line. He cast off the cat form like a cloak and crouched as a man with the desert in his bones, all edge and no humility. Anubis moved with the clean economy of one who has learned that a small act at the right time changes the fate of years. He took the pelt from the fallen beast as a hunter takes a trophy from a killer of cattle. He shook it once. The hide settled over his arm with the weight of a story that will not be forgotten. The defeated god fled into the cliff shadows where jackals do not bother to follow unless duty drives them. That night, the necropolis learned a new ceremony. The leopard skin became an emblem of a victory that mattered more than a battle between gods. It meant that wildness had been taken into service. It meant that the creature of speed and blood now served the art that keeps a body whole. From then on, the Sem priest who stood closest to the dead wore the spotted hide over his shoulder when he spoke the words that open senses and calm hearts. The skin hung heavy and cool. Each spot was a memory of a brand. Each rosette was a record of a burning that taught a lesson to chaos. The people saw that garment and thought at once of the night the jackal lord struck fire upon the back of fear. Old embalmers told the tale at the doorway of the chapels while incense crept along the ceiling like a tame ghost. They said that when the priest takes the leopard skin, he is putting on the courage that chased Set to the cliff. They said that when the spotted pelt brushes linen, it reminds every hand present that the work must be fearless and exact. If a novice trembled at the first cut, the master would draw 2 fingers over a rosette and murmur that this mark was won on a night when a god did not look away. Strength rose from simple touches. Order fed itself on remembrance. There were other tellings, and none were friendly to Set. In one, the red god tried once more to steal the body by changing himself into a bull, thick-necked and vengeful. Anubis met him in a narrow place where the rock gives no room for swagger and took from him the very pride of maleness. The desert swallowed the roar and gave back only a low moan that frightened birds from their roosts. In another, Set came in a form of smoke and was pressed into a vessel and burned until only a smear of ash remained, a stain ground into an altar stone by the heel of a god who does not forgive trespass against the dead. These versions carry the same weight. They all say that the guardian did what was needed to end the mischief. They all say that Osiris was kept safe because someone in that hall loved the law more than the pleasure of quarrels. The priests did not merely repeat these tales for drama. They made them into habits. Before a body entered the pure place, the threshold was touched with a coal from a brazier. The mark left at the lintel was the size of a thumb and quick to fade, but it told the room that the iron had sung once and could sing again. When the leopard skin was placed upon the Sem priest, he bowed his head as a soldier bows when a sword taps the shoulder. When the procession went out to the tomb, a wooden figure of a jackal rode at the front of the sledge, and on the strap of that figure a painted rosette reminded the escort that the road was guarded by a memory hotter than fear. Families felt the comfort of such signs. A mother who had buried a son could stand in the doorway on the 3rd day and look toward the low hills. If she saw a jackal stop on a ridge and turn its head once toward her, she took it as a message. The patrol is done. The tomb has been sniffed. The night belongs to its correct owner. Word traveled in villages that a thief who pried a seal near dusk heard a soft stamp behind him like the set down of a padded foot and ran until his lungs were knives. Whether the story closed with an arrest did not matter. What mattered was the sense that the West was not empty, that it had a warden, that his authority could sting. Scholars of a later age wrote the tale as a parable about the taming of violence for sacred ends. They saw in the spotted skin a reminder that the fiercest energies belong in service to care. The priests themselves would not have put it in such tidy words. They would have said what artisans always say. The tool that was once a danger becomes an instrument if held by the right hand. The leopard that once leapt the low walls of a cattle yard now sits on the shoulder of a man who speaks spells and steadies the dying. The lesson is practical. Bring every power you have into the room where the dead lie, and make that power kneel. As for Anubis, he wore no crown from that night. He did not need one. The work finished under his eye spoke for him. The rescue marked in spots upon a pelt spoke for him. The quiet of the necropolis after the lamps were dimmed spoke for him. In the painted halls where scenes of judgment and embalming were laid out in colors that still hold their voices after 3,000 years, the jackal lord remains composed. One hand rests upon the shrine. One gaze holds the room. Behind him, as a faint memory in gold and black, the curve of a leopard spot glints on a priestly cloak, like a star seen through thin cloud. Stand on the west bank at dusk, and you will understand why the ancients called it sacred. The sun lowers into a copper bowl, and the limestone cliffs drink the last light until they glow like old bone. The river fades to iron. Palm shadows lengthen like fingers across threshing floors and paths. From the fields comes the soft end of day chatter, then a hush that feels rehearsed, as if the whole land knows a cue. Beyond the last green stalks begins the country that belongs to Anubis. The people named it the Western Land. In that place, a god keeps a long promise. The promise is written 1,000 times across stone. On false doors and offering tables and small limestone stelae, a set of words appears that every mason could carve with his eyes closed. An offering which the king gives and which Anubis gives. The formula feeds the dead with bread and beer and a warm breath of remembrance. It does something else as well. It binds the tomb to the jackal lord by contract. The dead ask the king to intercede in heaven. They ask Anubis to stand at the door on earth. The pairing is old and deliberate. Power above. Guardianship here. Kingship in the east. Watchfulness in the west. In the early fields of Saqqara, the mastabas lie low and heavy like boats beached by a long tide. The doorway is a shallow recess that pretends to be a door and truly is a door to anyone who knows the right. On the jams, the living carved themselves, bearing baskets and jars, always moving toward the table that never empties. Above and beside these active scenes, there is often a quiet jackal stretched upon a shrine roof. He is not part of the harvest bustle. He is the still point, a pair of long ears, a long eye that seems to follow the chapels even now. This is how a culture draws reassurance. The workers come and go. The guardians do not. As the kingdom shifted its weight south to Thebes, the western bank began to bristle with doorways cut into cliff and wadi. The Valley of the Kings is a dry mouth with many tongues of stone leading inward. There the people hid their kings, and then the people came at night to find them again with chisels and oil flares. The state fought this quiet war with seals and curses, and with sworn men who patrolled the gullies by starlight. In this grim ledger, Anubis appears everywhere. A recumbent jackal carved on a lintel. A painted figure on a magical brick buried in the floor to snarl at intruders who step in the wrong place. A small wooden image carried by a guard captain whose men swore by the dog of the West before they took their rounds. Across the river at Deir el-Medina, the village of the tomb builders, the workers smelled gypsum in their sleep and woke to arguments about tool edges and quotas. Their walls hold the unguarded voices of a community that handled kings like furniture. They sketched Anubis in charcoal when they had a spare moment, the way soldiers draw saints on the backs of letters. They asked him to hold the gates while they were deep in the hills with hammers. They asked him to be kind when their own small tombs were sealed, because men who cut corridors for others know better than anyone how fragile a door can be. Among their ostraca are notes that scold a colleague for missing a shift, and notes that promise an offering to Anubis if a job ends without accident. A god who guards is a god who receives promises. The law joined hands with the liturgy. Papyri from the age of troubled kings record trials of thieves who pried out gold leaf and snapped ushabtai at the waist to search for hidden charms. The charges are written with careful anger: breaking and entering, desecration of seals, theft of the king's property, perjury before the gods. In the recital of wrongs, there is always an invocation that smells of fear. They swore falsely by Anubis. They were not afraid to lie in his presence. The scribe writes the name larger when he reaches that point. He wishes to be seen by the jackal who can scent lies like old blood on a robe. In sentences that banish men to quarries, the judges hope that the one who keeps the West will see that justice has been attempted. At tomb doors, curses lie like snakes coiled in script. May the jackal who dwells upon his mountain tear out the throat of any who enters with evil intent. May the Lord of the sacred land cut off the feet of intruders at the threshold. These are not the tantrums of the superstitious. They are the law spoken in the language of fear. They are the attempt of the weak to place the strong at their gate. A guardian god is as much a legal instrument as a spiritual one. If the village knows that a thief has more to fear than a human patrol, the night grows quieter. In later centuries, royal burials moved even deeper into secrecy, but the old signs followed. On the great shrines of gilded wood that ring a sarcophagus-like rooms within rooms, a jackal stands sentinel on a sloping roof. He is often small in proportion, yet the eye finds him first. There is a famous example set on a shrine with cords that have not been untied in 3,000 years. The jackal is black as the night it has defended, lacquer smooth and lean, eyes inlaid with a patient fire. Its forepaws hang over the edge in a casual pose that only makes the authority stronger. It looks the way a sentry looks at dawn when nothing has happened on his watch, and that quiet is his triumph. Families echoed the royal habits in miniature. A modest grave might have a stela bought from a market carver who knew how to place a jackal above a table with a few quick chisel strokes. A small clay figurine might ride the funerary sledge like a ship's figurehead. At the threshold, a smear of resin might mark the lintel to say that the house of the dead had been sealed in the sight of the one who invented such seals. The prayers are similar across wealth and time. Come, foremost of the Westerners, turn your face to me. Let no stranger break my rest. Let my name be spoken in your hearing when my children pour beer and set bread. There are nights when movement crosses the ridges, and even the modern guard pauses with his flashlight lowered. A shape not quite dog and not quite shadow stops on a crest and looks down. The old instinct rises in the human chest like a memory of childhood. The patrol is out. The boundary holds. The West keeps its pact. Scholars smile at such stories. They prefer ink to footsteps. Yet the men who spend their lives near tombs learn a polite habit. When the wind comes off, the cliffs cold and thin at dusk, they greet the hills as if someone is listening. It costs nothing to be courteous to the watch. The title foremost of the Westerners carries dignity that does not fray. The West is a direction and a doctrine, and a country of the heart. To be foremost, there is to walk a line between love and dread. The guardian is loved because he makes rest possible. He is dreaded because he stands for the rule that will not be bent even for grief. The black jackal on a roof beam looks down with a gaze that does not change when a king passes, and does not change when a potter is carried by his cousins. The scale of the person does not alter the duty, That is why the name traveled so far and lasted so long. A god who guards without boasting is a comfort that outlives dynasties. So the West remains a place with a keeper. The fields end and the white paths begin, and at that line a quiet figure waits. He is not demanding. He asks only that the living do their part. Seal the door. Bring a jar and a loaf and a name. Speak the formula. Keep the memory alive. He will do the rest. He will pace the ridges. He will nose the door crack and taste the air. He will watch through heat and through cold and through centuries that wear men out. In this way, the pact between Egypt and its dead holds. The river rises, the river falls. Kings come. Kings go. The jackal does not leave his post. There is a hall in the west that no living foot has crossed, and yet every living heart imagines. It is tall beyond measure and quiet in the way that a field is quiet under snow. Columns rise like oars in a boat that never docks. The floor is polished to a dark sheen that holds a reflection like still water. Torches do not smoke there. Their flames stand upright and steady as if afraid to lean. This is the hall of two truths. Here the dead stand to be measured. And here Anubis works with a care that feels older than the stones. The newly dead arrive with dust of the world still on their feet. They step in from corridors where the painted fields of the afterlife glow with the green of promise. They come led by servants of the right or by their own courage. Some arrive robed and plumed, bearing the memory of crowns. Some come in linen that a wife folded with her own hands. All lower their eyes when they hear the bronze whisper of the balance. It sits at the heart of the hall, a great beam with two pans that shine like small moons. Its fulcrum is carved with the signs of order. Beneath it a jackal waits, leaned slightly forward, watching the needle as a hunter watches the horizon. Anubis does not loom. He is present. That is the stronger thing. He stands beside the scale and a ribbon marks his throat. The color is dark against the black of his skin, which holds the deep gleam of polished obsidian. He holds a measuring rod that never lies. He places a palm upon the beam now and then to test its worth, not to coax it. When he lifts his gaze to the waiting soul, there is nothing of temper in it. There is attention. The room learns from that gaze how to be quiet. On one pan of the scale, Anubis sets the heart, taken from the chest and kept living in the sense that matters most. It is the seat of memory. It is the house of intention. It is the book a person wrote while breathing. On the other pan, he sets a feather from the brow of Ma, at the goddess whose name is law and balance and rightness in one. The feather is light. That is the lesson. The right life is not heavy. The right life rests easily upon the world. Around the hall sit the 42 assessors, one for each district of the land. They are not tyrants. They are librarians of conduct, keepers of the catalogue of sins and virtues. A scribe with a long beak of an ibis stands to one side with palette and reed pens. This is Thoth. He will write what is done without quibble and without haste. Beside him waits a figure that has given many men bad dreams. The devourer crouches with the patience of crocodiles, and with the coiled strength of lions, and with the mass of the river beast. She bears the name Amit, and she does not argue. She eats the hearts that fail. Nothing more and nothing less. The soul speaks before the weighing. In a voice that trembles at first and then steadies, the dead recite the negative confession, a long litany addressed to each assessor in turn. I have not stolen. I have not slain. I have not falsified the beam. I have not withheld grain from the mouths of children. I have not spoken wasp words against my neighbor. The confession is not a list of empty claims. It is a mirror the soul holds up to itself in public. It is a last chance to remember what one did with daylight. When the litany ends, the hall feels lighter because the truth has been named, even if the truth is hard. Sometimes the dead wear a scarab over the heart, carved of stone that catches and holds a cool light. On its back, a spell is written that asks the heart not to rise up and bear witness against its owner. It is a plea to conscience to be fair rather than eager to accuse. The spell is a kindness, not a loophole. Anubis reads it with no disdain. He has seen men crushed by their own severity. He has seen others float on self-regard. The weight he trusts is the weight he can read when metal touches metal. The moment comes. The heart lies in its pan like a small red stone. The feather lies in its pan like breath made visible. Anubis steps forward. He rests 2 fingers on the beam and lowers his head as if to listen for a note. The room could hear a strand of linen fall. The needle moves. It hesitates. It finds its place. The scales decide. When the heart rises to match the feather, the change in the air is like a season turning. Thoth writes that the soul is true of voice. The judges incline their heads like trees in a good wind. Anubis reaches out and takes the hand of the justified and leads them onward to the presence of Osiris. The old king sits on a throne flanked by sisters who are wives and goddesses both, Isis with her lap of refuge, Nephthys with her cool counsel. Offerings stand ready. A green plain lies beyond in a light that asks nothing and gives everything. Anubis does not intrude. He sets the hand he holds into a stronger hand and withdraws with the satisfaction of a master who has finished a task exactly right. When the heart sinks, the hall grows no louder. The devourer does not leap. She waits a breath for certainty as a crocodile waits for the river to deliver a body to her jaws. The beam does not lie. This heart is heavy with lies, with injured neighbors, with broken oaths, with a fake weight placed on the scale in the market, with a door closed to a hungry widow, with a day idled away when a brother needed help. Anubis does not snarl. He makes no speech. He tips the pan gently toward Amit. Thoth writes, "The devourer eats. There is no torture. There is nothing theatrical. There is only the end of a story that could have been written differently." It is mercy that this judgment is severe without cruelty. Egyptian wisdom kept a stern face for sin because the living needed to be taught while they still had hands to do better work. The funerary papyri that lined elite coffins taught the same lesson to those who could read. They are called the Chapters of Going Forth by Day, which men later named the Book of the Dead. Their spells are not shortcuts. They are reminders to stay awake. They teach the dead the names of gates and the proper salutes to guardians. But they also teach the living a habit of measure. Every shop scale in Egypt was a cousin to the one in the hall. Every honest trader practiced for his own weighing when he made sure the beam settled true. The scene of the weighing is painted again and again across centuries. Painters in Thebes and in the Fayum and in cities no longer standing knew the arrangement by heart. At the left, the dead approach. At the center, the beam tilts or balances. At the right, a god with a green face sits beside sisters with veils that look like wings. Under the beam, a monster waits, not frothing, merely inevitable. Behind the beam stands Anubis with his hand upon the scale and with the ribbon on his throat lying flat. The compositions differ in color and in grace, but the same calm honors the same law. The calm is the real lesson. The afterlife is not a riot. It is a courthouse with clean floors. In a few scenes, the dead, afraid their hearts will betray them, wear the great heart scarab and lay a hand to their chest as if to keep the witness still. In others, Anubis turns his head a fraction to look into the eyes of the soul, and that small turn is the whole of compassion. In all, the balance decides. Even a king whose tomb required a mountain does not escape the feather. The promise of rule was always bound to the promise of order. Anubis assures both without preference. Why a jackal as judge and guide? Because a hunter knows silence and attention. Because a watcher does not blink when a moment matters. Because a guardian who keeps graves safe from dogs and men alike is the right guardian to keep truth safe from clever words and false grief. The Egyptians did not make the cosmos a playground. They made it a place of work and of reward. Anubis belonged in such a world the way a master builder belongs at the keystone. When a man in Memphis set a fair measure of grain upon a scale and brushed away a stone that would have added a finger of weight, he performed a worship of Anubis as sure as any incense offering. When a woman in Asyut kept her tongue from a cutting lie that would have pleased her for a moment and harmed a rival for a year, she lightened her heart for a future hour under a torch in a hall she had never seen. This is how a myth becomes a law that walks the streets. It would be pleasant to say that all who hoped were found light. That would be a lie unworthy of the hall. Egypt did not flatter its dead. It built a god into the judgment who could not be bought and could not be flustered. The comfort is not in guaranteed pardon. The comfort is in guaranteed fairness. The comfort is in the hand that will be offered if the beam settles true, and in the fact that no one can tilt the scale with gold or tears once the heart is placed upon it. So the jackal-headed guardian keeps his watch where the feather lies. He listens to confessions that are older than kings. He reads faces better than any advocate. He moves the beam with 2 fingers when the dust of the road clings to it and when the pin must be freed to fall to center. He has stood there for a time that cannot be counted with reeds or with notches on a staff. He will stand there as long as men die and hope to walk in green fields again. Justice in Egypt was not a scroll or a throne. It was a balance set upon a table and a god who refused to look away. After the judgment in the Hall of Two Truths, the idea came back with the mourners and with the men who kept ledgers. It crossed the river in quiet boats and stepped into streets and markets without a trumpet. The face it wore belonged to Anubis, not the thunder of a storm god, not the blaze of a sun lord. Justice that watches, justice that measures, justice that keeps promises. The word that held this world together was Ma'at, a small word in the mouth and a vast one in the mind. Ma'at meant truth. It meant proportion. It meant that a brick should be the size it is declared to be, and that a measure of grain should not hide a stone in its heart. It meant that a man who sits in judgment must know the smell of fear and must set his own heartbeat aside. Anubis lived at the center of that word. When a scribe drew the scene of the weighing on a tomb wall, he did not paint only a journey beyond the grave. He painted the rule that gave weight to every contract signed by reed pen and every oath uttered in a courtyard. The jackal by the scales was a warning pinned above the desk in the office of the soul. In towns where the sound of chisels rang against the hills, and in villages where women counted dates into baskets, the name of the guardian worked like a plumb line. A trader in Memphis set a little jackal figurine on his shelf near the weights. He kept a feather carved of bone beneath his scale and touched it before the morning opened its doors. When he shaved a sliver from his own profit to square the account, he was thinking of a dark figure in a quiet hall and of a needle that does not flatter. A tax collector who feared Anubis more than a governor did not take the extra handful that his hand might have claimed. A foreman at Deir el-Medina who cursed and grumbled all morning still made sure every tool was counted at dusk, and when he initialed a tally, he breathed the name of the one who reads deeper than ink. The courts learned the same lesson. In trial records written by weary clerks who dipped their pens too fast, the wrongs are named with sharp care, breaking a seal, swapping a good jar for a thin one. False witness in the presence of the gods. When the scribe writes the last charge, he gives the letters space. They swore falsely by Anubis. For a thief it was one more line filled with trouble. For the judge it was the line that turned the stomach. A man who will lie with the jackal listening will lie to anyone. Punishments followed. Quarry work until the hands split. Beatings. Banishment. The law cut in its clumsy way. Over and above it stood the promise that the careful god will weigh again without haste in a hall where bribes do not reach. This guardianship did not sit only on benches and in stalls. It sat in the heart. Philosophers of Egypt preferred work to talk. They wrote their ethics into tasks. When a potter kept his clay damp and covered against the sun, when a mason wetted a stone to see the grain more truly, when a midwife kept silence about a paternity that would have broken a family, these were offerings to Anubis as surely as any cone of incense. The gods are not blinded by ceremony. They see the man who returns a lost ring and the woman who admits a mistake, while the error can still be mended. They see the apprentice who adds a fig to a widow's measure because her hands shook when she counted. A heart becomes light through such small acts, like linen laid strip by strip until a body is whole. Priests taught this with a patience that outlasted dynasties. In chapels smelling of oil and rushlight, they lifted the little images and reminded the living that the judge of the scales had a long memory. They taught children to speak the names of the assessors, not to frighten them, but to give them a map of conscience. They taught apprentices in the embalming house that hands which do holy work must be clean when no one is watching. They said that the God who keeps the tomb keeps the truth also. A boy who grew with those lessons looked up at the jackal on a lintel and felt the same calm he felt when a good master stood in a workshop doorway and watched in silence. The presence of a careful witness makes people straighten without being told. The idea crossed borders. Greeks who came to Egypt laughed at animal heads on godly shoulders in the morning and made offerings at noon. Even they felt the sober comfort of a measure that no advocate can argue away. In their schools, they swore odds and ends of oaths by many curious powers. In conversation, they took to saying by the dog of Egypt when they wished a truth to carry weight. They meant Anubis, even if they could not shape his old name on Greek tongues. Traders from the islands carried home small bronze jackals to set above their private ledgers. There are Roman tales of processions where a black-faced guardian marches among the masks and music, and for once, the crowd lowers its noise. Nothing subdues a festival like the thought of judgment that is exact and fair. The papyri we call the chapters of going forth by day were manuals for the dead. They were pocket maps of the underworld and guides to the words that open gates. They were also civic books. The pages where Anubis stands at the scale taught the living a civic habit that kept storehouses honest and quarries safer than they might have been. In the negative confession, a man says, "I have not withheld milk from the mouths of children." He says, "I have not fouled the river with waste." He says, "I have not taken the hides of the temple herd for my own sandals." Those are acts of this side of the river. The god of the other side examined them closely. There is an icon I have seen again and again in quiet rooms. Anubis bends toward a scale. His fingers are on the beam. Behind him a scribe writes. Before him a soul waits and tries not to swallow too loudly. There is no panic in the faces. There is no malice. The power of the scene lies in its refusal to hurry and in its refusal to be swayed by decoration. The dead wear necklaces heavy enough to tax a neck. The feather is a single plume that a child could lift with 2 fingers. The god is not large. He is proportionate. The lesson is elegant. Justice needs no drama. Justice needs hands that know where to rest. In the marketplaces, the lesson meant that a buyer could bring a small weight from home without insult. It meant a seller could correct an error aloud without shame. In the household, it meant a father who lost his temper could go to his daughter and say, "I was wrong to speak as I did and mean it." In the guardhouse, it meant the captain who grew angry at a drunk did not beat him to make a show for his men, but wrote the charge and set the watch and went home to his bread. The shadow of a jackal over the door improved everyone's manners. There were men who believed they could game even this. They carried heart scarabs with pleas written on them and lived like thieves with prayers on their chests. The god has seen this too many times to be impressed. He permits such spells because even a coward may grow brave in his last hour and step to the beam naked of excuse. He permits them because sometimes a person has been too hard on himself for too long and needs a mercy that speaks to a frightened conscience. He has never permitted lies to weigh less than they weigh. The beam tells on the soul. It is better to adjust your dealings while you breathe than to argue poetry with a device of bronze. If you wish to see his justice alive in the world of the living, go to the West Bank at evening. Watch a patrolman stop at a doorway and touch the lintel with 2 fingers as if greeting a host. He is greeting the unseen warden. Then go to a market in mourning and find the clerk whose ink is always a little smudged because he keeps checking his sums with a care that costs him time. Ask why he is so slow, and he will laugh softly and say that a man should not invite embarrassment in the next world over a few grains of barley. Look at the small stele where a family spent a month of spare hours to hire a carver to inscribe a prayer, an offering which the king gives and which Anubis gives. The grammar is awkward if you think like a modern scribe. It is perfect if you have ever buried someone you love. You need both the far power and the near guardian. You need the law above and the law at the door. This is why the jackal endures in the mind when other gods blur with time. He does not flatter. He does not strike a pose. He works. He weighs. He keeps his night watch on the ridge, and then he comes inside and reads a heart like a craftsman reading grain. He is the god a mason respects, and a widow thanks, and a judge fears enough to sit straighter. He is the god a child can understand when she places a bread crust on a tomb ledge and whispers a promise to try to be kind tomorrow. He is the god who makes fear useful and turns it into attention and then into peace. The place of embalming sits where the city gives way to quiet, close to the lip of the western desert where wind carries the taste of salt and chalk. The walls are mud brick cooled by shade and by jars of water set in niches to sweat in the heat. Inside the air carries layers of scent that do not quarrel with one another. Pine resin like a forest in the mind. Cedar like a shipwright's yard. Myrrh sweet and slow. Palm wine sharp as a clean blade. Natron settles in pale drifts along the floor where the sweepers never quite erase yesterday. Lamps hang from pegs and their flames stand straight, because this is a room that takes even fire in hand. They call it the pure place. The door lintel bears words that remind every visitor to leave quarrels behind. Apprentices step in with their sandals dangling from one hand and set them aside as if they are setting aside pride. A scribe with his palette sits near the doorway and writes each name in a long roll that records who came to do the work and who came to be done for. On a slab of alabaster, a body lies washed and oiled, a citizen who once bargained over onions and laughed at a festival and now waits for a craft to return to him what the living must not keep. Around him, the tall jars stand open as if they were waiting mouths. Copper bowls gleam. Blades nest in cloth like sleeping snakes. The Sem priest comes first. He wears a leopard skin that falls cool across a linen kilt, the spots like small eyes that remember a night when wildness learned its place. He is not a lord in this room. He is the foreman of a crew whose tools must be clean and whose minds must be calmer than normal minds. He lifts a jackal mask from a cedar chest and holds it for the length of a breath. When he draws it on, the room changes the way a ship changes when the captain steps aboard. He becomes, for a time, the very presence of the one who taught this craft. His voice lowers and the words he speaks settle along the walls like a seal pressed into wax. Come, Lord of the sacred land, stand by these hands. Let this work be exact. Near him, the lector priest murmurs the chapters that guide the living and the dead alike. He does not chant for thunder. He chants to number the steps. The body is washed for purity with water and with wine that stings the air and carries away the breath of the market. The chest is opened by a cut that is clean and spare. No gesture is wasted because waste would be an insult. What must come out, comes out. And each organ is lifted with a care that a mother might show to a sleeping child. They are rinsed and dried and wrapped in linen that crackles, because it is stiff with good resin. The jars that receive them carry lids shaped as guardians. The man-faced keeper of the liver, the baboon-faced keeper of the lungs, the falcon-faced keeper of the intestines, the jackal-faced keeper of the stomach. Their proper names are spoken to settle the guardians at their posts. The heart remains where it belongs because it has a later appointment with a feather and with a god who watches. Natron does its slow, skilled work. The body is laid upon a bed of salt that is older than history and wiser than any physician. 70 days become a count that families whisper in their houses while they wait for news. The workshop breathes around the quiet patient. Resins simmer and cool. Linen is torn into bands with a steady rhythm. The scribe dips and writes. Children pass the doorway on small errands and glance in with the grave curiosity that grows in a land where death is not a stranger. At intervals, the priests return to test the body with a press of the finger, a craftsman's check that has nothing of morbid fascination in it. When the pinch refuses to yield, the next stage is ready. The wrapping is music. 2 men hold a band of linen taut while a third guides it under and over, so smooth that the sheet seems to move of its own will. Amulets enter the work like quiet guests. A dyad pillar for spine and steadiness, a scarab for the courage to speak true words, a knot of the goddess to bind the protection of motherhood around a fragile place, an eye to watch the road ahead. Each is placed with a prayer that fits it as a sheath fits a blade. Resin binds the layers and makes of the person a single whole again. With every turn of the bandage, the figure becomes less a body and more a promise. For the last rite, the room gathers itself. The Sem-priest stands with the adze that opens, senses that grief has closed. He touches the lips because words must go forth again. He touches the eyes because sight must return. He touches the ears because names must be heard in a garden that is greener than any field by the Nile. The lector priest speaks the words that call the doors by their names, and they open like polite hosts. The jackal mask looks down at the face, and there is in that gaze the steady pride of a master who has taught his trade well. The moment is not spectacle. It is simple as a first breath. While the sacred work proceeds, the world keeps pace outside. At Memphis, the house of Anubis watches over the craft as a guild watches over a trade. Fees are posted and contracts are recited aloud. A family can choose rich cedar or simple native woods. They can choose a gilded face or a painted one. They can choose a long service with many amulets or a short service with the essentials done well. The priests make no faces at the poor. A decent burial is a charter of faith and of public order. A small jackal upon a little chest will guard as seriously as a larger image on a shrine fit for a prince, as long as the words are spoken and the hands are honest. The apprentices learn by standing close and by keeping still. One wraps and unwraps a practice limb for weeks until the corners align without thought. Another grinds natron and records weights until the sums come as quick as breath. A third learns to cut only what must be cut and to set a knife down flat when it is done. Jokes are told in the corners because this is human work and not a tale of grim statues. But when a name is spoken at the door and a family takes 3 steps in and stops, the jokes vanish as quickly as flavors vanish in a draught of strong wine. A person loved has come to be made whole. The room knows what that means. There is a code that is not written on papyrus yet, is known as surely as any law. Do not rush, do not boast, do not handle the dead with anything less than affection. Wash your hands after anger and before work. Speak little during the rites, and speak clearly when a word is needed. Put tools back in their places because order is a second prayer. If you are tired, admit it and ask another to take your place, because pride stains bandages worse than resin stains linen. The young men learn this and carry it into other rooms of life. A nation profits whenever a guild teaches patience. On festival days, the same hands that divided resin and counted linen lift images of the jackal lord and carry them through streets that smell of bread and sweat and river wind. The people throw flower heads like small suns. The priests in spotted skins move with the gravity of men who know that every step in public adds weight to their steps in the pure place. An old woman who has no coin to spare raises both hands as the image goes by and says, "Only watch. The word is enough. It is the whole covenant. We will do our part. You do yours." While royal embalments could fill halls with gold and lure thieves from 3 provinces, ordinary burials kept the meaning honest. A merchant who owned 6 donkeys and 3 good cloaks could pay for resin that would keep his fragrance even in winter. A potter might bargain for a painted coffin whose white ground made a virtue of simplicity. A soldier might lie in the workshop with scars that told a short history of uprisings put down and border roads walked too far. Each came to the slab, equal in nakedness. Each received the same words at the last when the adze touched lip and eye and ear. The difference between rich and poor in this place was a matter of ornaments, not of attention. The house of Anubis taught another lesson the city did not forget. Work for the dead sustains the living. Carpenters, weavers, perfumers, quarrymen, scribes, jar makers, carvers of gods, singers of laments, all found place in the chain that begins when someone stops breathing. The economy of care is a steady river. It keeps skill alive when drought thins the fields. It keeps justice present when men are tempted to steal because hunger has a loud voice. If a thief thinks twice because a black jackal will hear him, a jar of oil is spared, and a craftsman eats. The god who guards tombs also guards wages. Now and then the workshop receives a traveler who does not belong to any house, a stranger wrapped in the charity of a neighborhood, a child who has outlived both parents and bears no seal of a clan. The priests do not haggle at such times. They set hands to the task with a special quiet. The scribe writes the placeholder that keeps every name from being lost. A small amulet is fetched from a chest kept for just this need. Kebeched, the daughter who brings water, is invoked with more tenderness than usual, and a libation is poured until the cup is light. In those hours, the room feels like a family that the city can borrow when the city falls short. When at last the wrapping is complete and the painted mask is set in place and the cords are tied on the shrine chest, the workshop passes from craft to ceremony. The sledge is brought. The little jackal is fixed to its prow with a leather thong. The family stands close enough to touch, but not so close as to jostle the order. The Sem priest lifts his mask for a moment to show his face, because the living must see that all this is done by men as well as by gods. Then he lowers it again, and the procession steps into the light, while the lector priest's voice changes from the measured speech of the room to the fuller cadence that loves the open air. The road to the tomb begins. The house behind them settles its tools and its scents and its quiet, and waits for the next name. Egypt gave its greatest temples to the sun on the eastern bank. But the West kept a quieter network of houses and shrines where Anubis was master. They stood near necropolises and at the thresholds of holy deserts. Their courtyards were white with powdered limestone, and their door lintels were darkened by the touch of many hands that asked protection without ceremony. Priests in spotted skins moved through these places with steady steps, not as princes but as attendants who had learned that greatness hides itself in careful work. The Greeks who walked the Nile and took notes called one such place Sinopolis, the city of dogs. The name is a tidy translation of a truth the villagers already knew. There, the god was felt in the very breath of the streets. You could hear him in the dusk chorus of stray dogs that made the alleys sing as the first stars came on. You could see him in the small altars, where a black jackal watched from a painted roof, while a pottery bowl steamed with a little stew and a little beer set aside for the warden of the ridge. Sinopolis was not rich like Heliopolis with its high pylons or like Thebes with its grand courts. It was faithful. That counts for more in the last measure. Across the land, near great cemeteries, the gods' presence gathered in peculiar forms. The people kept living dogs and jackals with a gentleness that surprises those who have not read the old ways closely. They fed them as one feeds parishioners, with scraps and with bowls set at corners that soon became shrines of their own. When one of these animals died, the priests laid it out with as much respect as a commoner's father might receive. They wrapped it in linen that remembered the great art in smaller stripes, and set it in clay or wooden coffins, shaped to a narrow muzzle and pointed ears. Then they lowered it into galleries that run like cool rivers beneath the necropolis, corridors crowded with rows of votive mummies. Each small shape was a petition made solid. Each bundle meant a prayer had been spoken in a low voice and paid for with a coin that represented a day's bread. In torchlight, those catacombs looked like a storehouse of faith, long walls of sleep entrusted to the same guardian who watches princes. In the houses of Anubis, the god's image was not always grand. Often he reclined as a jackal carved in wood and painted deep black, his forepaws hanging over the edge of a gilded shrine box, his eyes inlaid with a light that knows patience. The carpenter rubbed the surface until it held the soft sheen of riverstone wet at dawn. A ribbon hung from the throat to show office. A small cushion raised the chest to a dignified incline. The statue was not large, but it commanded the room the way a good captain commands a ship without raising his voice. People brought him bowls of grain and cuts of bread that steamed in the morning chill. They poured beer that smelled of barley and yeast. They burned kiffy and cedar and watched the smoke climb with the hopeful certainty of a man who has tied a good knot. Offerings were not bribes, they were conversation. A family came with a little stew and a string of garlic, and said, "Keep the watch tonight for our mother." A mason came with a jar of clear water, and said, "Let my hand be steady when I cut the names." A widow came with a fig and a promise to speak her husband's name aloud every week. The fig set down with both palms as if it were a jewel. The priests took a share as was proper, and the rest went to the poor or to the animals who wandered as symbols and as citizens. In the books, the offerings read like inventories. In the courtyards, they felt like love letters written with the grammar of a kitchen. There were processions as well, quieter than the parades of solar gods, but certain in their step. On chosen days, the image of Anubis rode upon a low shrine, carried by men whose arms did not shake. The spotted skins swung in a slow rhythm. Children ran ahead to sprinkle water on the dust. Women cast flower heads that burst like small suns against the black lacquer. A lector priest walked at the side and spoke blessings that named streets and families. At corners where thieves were known to talk shop, the bearers paused and turned the jackal toward the alley mouth. The message needed no words. Shops barred their shutters with the crisp sound of men who understood the point. Anput, who is the mirror of the jackal lord, and the quiet hand at a beer stood in her own corners of these houses. She received soft offerings, small combs of beeswax and baskets of linen scraps for swaddling and mourning. People asked her to soothe the new dead and to steady the living who had been left with rooms that suddenly felt too large. In the same courts, a slender serpent goddess wound along the basins of ablutions. This was Kebeshet, the daughter who brings cool water. Embalmers called her name when they poured libations over linen and when they rinsed resin from their fingers. Mourners called her when the summer heat sat like a weight on a courtyard, and grief made the tongue thick. They asked her to ease the thirst of the dead and the living both. The little altars to Kebeshet were simple. A cup, a sprig of fresh palm, a painted curl of water that looks like music. Not every town could afford a house with columns and a treasury, but even villages along low desert had their jackal stone. A knee-high stele with a quick chisel sketch of the god reclining upon a roof was enough. There, a man on his way to the cemetery could touch 2 fingers to the image and whisper, "Be with me while I seal the door." There, a woman could set down a warm cake and a mouthful of beer and call a name into the West. The West was always listening. The god did not count clergy by head. He counted hands that did their work with care. The economy of devotion worked in plain ways. Pilgrims bought little jackal amulets carved in basalt or faience. They tied them to cords and wore them at the throat when they had to travel at night. Mothers tucked them into baskets where newborns slept, a small reassurance against the old fear that the boundary between this house and the next can be thin in the first week of life. Scribes painted the god on coffin boards in quick but loving lines, and were paid with bread and oil and a promise of a mention when the family prayed. Carvers sold simple false doors with the formula already chiseled in, leaving a blank for the name that would make the stone a home. All these acts greased the axles of daily life and kept faith from being an expensive luxury. The priests themselves were not austere in a way that scorned the world. They ate from the offerings and they laughed when work permitted. They married as other men do, and their children grew up to learn either the craft or the field. Yet when they set a mask on and took a knife in hand, the room changed. They carried the memory of a leopard-marked knight and of a god bending over the first mummy. They did not forget that a shrine is a workshop, and a workshop can be a shrine. It is a hard lesson to carry always, but it keeps men honest when a storehouse door is tempting and when a cousin needs a favor that would break a rule. In one famous treasury, guardians left a jackal on a shrine with cords tied tight for a king who died young. The statue's ears stand like blades, and its eyes follow you with a watch that is more patient than any man. The cords are still uncut. The message has outlived the sender and the recipient both. Do not try this door. The warden is on duty. In that single image, the cult of Anubis finds its whole sermon. Faith made into wood. Vigilance made into posture. A threat transformed by craft into peace. Temple records list festivals with the quiet pride of bookkeepers who know they are feeding more than bodies. On such days, the city washed its face and put on its best collar. The Sem priest spoke to the crowd and told again the stories that made the spots on his cloak meaningful. He told of dogs that guard unasked. He told of a child found in reeds and of a woman who sang him calm. He told of scales that do not lie and of a field beyond the west where a man might once more meet those he had lost, if only he kept his hands steady at the weights. People wept without shame because the stories were theirs, and always would be. By evening the offerings had been counted, the dogs fed, the poor supplied, the candles snuffed, the floors swept, the gates barred. The jackal on the shrine looked no different than he had in mourning. Gods do not sag with fatigue. The priests rolled their shoulders and walked home under a sky full of hard, clear stars. The desert lay close and familiar, like a sleeping bull that does not dream of harming anyone and yet must be respected with every step. Along the ridge, a real jackal stopped and looked down. Somewhere in a house, a woman spoke a name into a corner and waited for her own breath to steady. Faith had done its quiet work. So the cult of Anubis bound city to cemetery, kitchen to chapel, fear to duty, and grief to craftsmanship. It did not roar. It did not promise what it could not give. It promised a watch. It promised a craft that turns endings into passages. It promised that a god would stand at the door until the last grain of sand has fallen in the last unseen glass. Empires change the names on coin and decree, but the West keeps its guardian. When the old kingdoms loosened and the crowns shifted like sand in a wind, priests still walked the necropolis paths with their spotted cloaks folded over one arm and their voices low. In Memphis and in Thebes, the embalming houses smoked with resin as they always had. Kings became generals with foreign accents and then became kings again. The Nile rose and fell on schedule more faithfully than ministries. In courtyards where a jackal watched from a shrine roof, offerings continued to steam in the morning and to cool by noon. A god who earns his place by keeping the dead at peace does not lose office when borders redraw themselves on maps. The Greeks came in ships that flashed like fish and in lines of men who marched as if their sandals counted the earth. They looked upon the temples and felt both delight and caution. A people who loved reason stood in shadows filled with old smoke and listened to stories that had survived longer than their own cities. Some laughed at animal heads on godly shoulders by daylight and then went home and swore by the dog of Egypt when they needed their words to carry weight. In the markets, the phrase passed from mouth to mouth, half jest and half prayer. They meant Anubis even if their tongues shaped the syllables with a foreign slant. Under the new dynasties that grew from Macedon's long spear, Egypt learned to speak two languages at once. In stone the builders kept carving as their grandfathers had. In the courts and in the ports the talk moved in Greek. The gods learned to wear new garments without giving up their old ones. Anubis did not need to change his work. He changed his company. In the bright age of Alexandria, the learned set Egyptian guardians beside Greek messengers and saw correspondences bloom. Hermes guided souls in Greek thought. Anubis guided souls in Egyptian rites. The two were introduced as if at a banquet where clever hosts seat kindred spirits together. A new figure walked the painted walls and the amulet stalls. Hermanubis. Jackal-headed and bearing the caduceus. Jackal-headed and wing-shod. A union not of confusion, but of recognition. Two tasks, one duty. The synagogues of wisdom in that sea city loved to catalogue such harmonies. Philosophers debated the nature of the soul as if it were a fine metal to be weighed. And somewhere a painter in a back street laid black lacquer on a jackal form with an old contentment. Processions clattered along colonnades where the scent of incense rose and the sound of Greek hymns braided with Egyptian drums. At festivals for Isis, the ship of the goddess rode on shoulders through the bobbing crowd, and among the masks a black face appeared with long ears and calm eyes. The presence of the jackal steadied the spectacle. Even a city built for astonishment keeps a place for order. In the Fayum, where the lake gathers light like a jewel set in brown earth, the dead began to carry their faces into eternity on boards of limewood painted with care. The portraits look out with eyes that have seen both Homer and the Book of Going Forth by day. Among the wreaths and the gold leaf, among the Greek notes of fashion and the Roman taste for precision, a small jackal still appears on coffin chests and in margins of paint. The old guarantee signs its name quietly. A family that has learned Greek letters well enough to write a child's epitaph also keeps a faience amulet of a black guardian tied under the wrappings, where no scholar will see it until centuries have passed and a museum light finds that glaze. The law carried the god into new rooms. Roman officials loved contracts even more than Egyptians did, but here the contracts also carried a memory of a hall where a heart lies beside a feather. Judges who wore the purple fringe heard cases of theft from tombs with a severity that owed as much to custom as to edict. The charge sheets read like familiar stories given new ink: breaking of seals, removal of amulets, swearing falsely by Anubis. Fines and beatings and long labor followed. The civilized habit of punishing men for what they do to the resting places of others survived the swap of standards from lotus to eagle. Writers in Latin borrowed the god for their own shows and sermons. There is an old account of a procession where the emperor's city went to watch gods parade in puppet steps and living stairs. In that flurry of gold and color, the black guardian walked, his face gleaming like smoked silver under a sun that made everyone squint. Spectators who had little patience with sermons still felt their chatter fall when the jackal passed. It is a good thing for a city that needs its citizens to behave, to have a god among its pageantry who does not laugh and does not wink. None of this erased the old forms on the west bank. In the valleys, the tombs continued to receive kings under deep stone. The workmen of Deir el-Medina still sketched a jackal on ostraca when they had a spare minute at noon. The house of Anubis in Memphis still took in the poor stranger and offered the rites without haggling when a body had no family. The spotted skins smelt of sun and of incense. The adze kissed the mouth. The priest with a mask steadied the mummy when it was raised. When the procession began, a small wooden jackal rode the prow of the sledge, as it had done when the pyramids were young. A civilization proves itself by what it keeps. Philosophers and priests argued at the edges as learning always argues with devotion. Plutarch came to the stories as a guest who wanted to be a good listener and tried to make elegant sense of what he heard. He rapped Osiris and Isis and the jackal lord in language that pleased the schools and yet preserved the heart of the tale. He knew he was walking on a floor that had been polished by many feet and by many tears. He took the old names seriously. That is the first merit of a foreign scholar, and the last. When the old faith sank into quieter channels and new hymns rose in basilicas and monastic cells, the embalming houses fell silent by degrees. The jars stood empty. The knives went to rust. The leopard skins were folded for the last time and left with a respectful hand upon them. Yet the bond between Egypt and its guardian did not snap. It turned into presence. The jackal stayed in the works of art and in the habit of touching a lintel with 2 fingers when one passes a tomb door. He stayed in the caution of a farmer who does not cheat the measure because a beam is more frightening than a magistrate. He stayed in the story told to a child when the house loses someone and the child asks a question that cannot be dodged. A careful God is a medicine that lasts. Archaeology in the New Age opened doors with levers and brushes instead of with spells. Still, the watchers felt watched. Men who lifted lids to rooms shut since Hellenistic years felt the steady gaze of an inlaid eye upon their shoulders. On gilded roofs, a jackal reclined with serene contempt for time. The cords that sealed a royal shrine still crossed under his paws. Do not. The message that worked on thieves works dimly on scholars too. The best of them listened and took only drawings and careful notes until the law allowed the rest. The worst dropped their courage like a lamp and ran from a cough of dust and their own imaginations. Both reactions would have pleased a god who believes in good manners. Through all of this, the image of the jackal leading the justified to the throne endured. Hellenistic painters adjusted the tilt of the chin. Roman stonecutters squared the shoulders. The core remained. Anubis took a hand as a good usher does and placed it into stronger hands. In Greek captions and in demotic scrawls and in Latin notes, the message stayed plain. A guardian does not seek glory. He keeps the doors and he keeps the scales. He serves a larger seat without jealousy and without fatigue. A people that can carry its guardian across conquests and fashions and alphabets is a people with a spine. Egypt proved as much. The river did what it always does. The desert kept its counsel. The West remained a doctrine and a direction. In houses where a grandmother still lit a cone of incense at dusk and spoke a name into a corner, the smoke lifted as it had lifted in the Old Kingdom and in the reign of Alexander and in the time of emperors and after. The God who hears such things does not keep a calendar that men can read. Time does not move in straight lines in Egypt. It drifts like sand and circles back like a falcon on a warm current. For a long while, the old rites quieted. New prayers filled new roofs of stone. Men in black robes and men in white debated in cloisters where incense rose and was named by other words. Yet in the West, the vigilance did not end. A guardian does not need a choir. He requires only a threshold. News from the valley came to the world in a voice that trembled between awe and discipline. A buried door had yielded. Steps descended into dust that no one had breathed for 3,000 years. Candles burned like obedient stars. The first chamber was crowded with gold and wood that had learned to shine like gold. Beyond a second sealed door stood a shrine all cords and warnings, and upon its sloping roof a jackal waited as if he had been asked to hold his breath for a long count, and had done so without complaint. The lacquer of his body was deep and soft. His eyes had been made to catch even the weakest flame and turn it into attention. The cords crossed under his paws without a single strand frayed. "Do not," said that patient posture. "Do not," said the long gaze. The message had traveled from a court that vanished before Rome, was a rumor to the age of cameras and electric lamps without losing a syllable. The men who stood there felt what quarry workers and thieves and priests had felt before them. The presence of rules older than your own life steadies and warns at once. They wrote in their books with hands that tried not to shake. They cut the cords only when the law allowed, and then with more ceremony than many thrones have seen. The world looked on from far away and learned something it had once known and then forgot. Faith is not noise. It is a watchman at a door and an agreement not to be broken in haste. After that opening came many. The desert gave up its corridors like a miser who has decided to write a will. In each, the old order spoke. On magical bricks buried in floors, a quick little jackal raised his head as if to sniff an intruder. On coffin lids, his profile watched the names arranged in careful rows. On the backs of heart scarabs, the plea was still there, in short lines that begin with, "O my heart, do not act against me in the presence of the balance." Museum rooms filled with this quiet. Under glass, faces dark and still lay in fine linen. Beside them, small amulets waited with their tasks unspoiled by centuries. Visitors slowed without knowing why. A hush fell that was not commanded. The god was not present as a statue only. He was present as a habit of attention that moved from object to object, like a patrol. The scholars made arguments, as scholars must. They quarreled over parents and dates and the boundaries between one jackal god and another in the earliest banners. They measured pigments and traced trade routes hinted at by resins in cloth. They moved in the circles of the careful and put footnotes under everything that would hold still for it. Amid their debates, the figure of the guardian kept his poise. Whether called Inpu in the old speech or Anubis in the Greek tongue, whether shown full animal or man with the head and the eyes of night, he maintained his offices without heat. He guarded the dead in their glass houses, as he had guarded them in stone ones. He stood at the scales on painted papyri and taught everyone who cared to look that justice is a craft before it is a verdict. Not all of his service belongs to rooms with security guards and labels. He walks in the daily memory of a country that still calls the West by its old names. At dusk in small towns, people pause on thresholds that face the desert and speak into corners, putting a name into the air as an offering of breath. A jackal moves along a ridge and stops and looks down, and for an instant the oldest pact in the land is renewed. "Keep them," says a grandmother to no one a stranger could see. "Keep them," answers the ridge with silence that does not feel empty. The cult that once mummified whole packs of dogs left a different legacy for a different world. The dog that sleeps in the shade of a workyard in Cairo, ribs showing and ears tattered, receives a crust and a slow hand on his head. It is not worship, it is recollection. Somewhere beneath the name of a saint and the name of the prophet lies a layer of older memory that says, the four-legged guardian deserves courtesy for ancient reasons. This is how civilizations endure. They hide what they must and keep what they cannot afford to lose in the simple acts of ordinary days. Writers and painters and makers of fictions have tried their hands at him as well. They put him on screens and on book covers and in tales meant to frighten or to comfort. Sometimes they dress him in armor and send him into battles that would have puzzled his earliest priests. Sometimes they make him a stern king of the dead and forget that he has always worked best as a perfect servant. Even then, the core glints through the costume. Long ears like blades. A gaze fixed on the exact place a gaze should be. One hand upon a scale. One steadying touch upon a coffin. The essential pose survives even the loudest modern retellings like a melody heard under drums. The finest lesson he carries into the present is not a spell or a charm, it is a standard of conduct. The idea that the world is held together by measured acts performed with respect has never been more needed than in cities that forget their dead as soon as the backhoe fills the trench. The god reminds without preaching. Leave the workroom in order, seal the door and do not return at night. Touch the lintel when you pass a grave. Do not take what was given for eternity and spend it on an afternoon. Keep your scale clean. Let the beam find center. Help the widowed. Admit the truth before you are forced to. If you do these things, the last hallway will not terrify you. There is a last image that returns to me whenever I think of the Jackal Lord in the age of airplanes and electric bells. A museum room after closing. The guard has made his rounds. The lights have been lowered until the cases hold only a ghost of their day. Out in the street, a bus coughs and goes. Within, a black shape reclines upon a shrine. The gloss on his back gathers one thread of light from a door not quite shut. He does not sleep. Gods do not sleep at their posts. Somewhere far from that room, people are burying their dead with different prayers and different tools. Somewhere near it, a stray dog noses a paper cup and trots away into its own business. Between those two worlds, the old watcher keeps the middle. He makes a broken world feel slightly less so. In the end, Anubis stands as the answer to a question every people asks. What keeps the dark from being disorder? Egypt replied with a craftsman in black who minds the doors and the weights. He began as a fear turned into a prayer. He endured as a trade turned into a sacrament. He walks still as a presence turned into a habit of fairness. He has held that office longer than any king, and he will hold it until stars choose to forget their paths. In the long record of men speaking to what frightens them, the jackal who watches is among the clearest and the most faithful voices. He promises nothing he cannot keep. He keeps more than he promises.